The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned Hartwell Industrial Complex as Officer Sarah Collins stepped out of her patrol car. The familiar weight of her service weapon pressed against her hip, while her keen green eyes surveyed the deteriorating concrete structures ahead. Beside her, Max emerged from the vehicle with practiced precision, his black and tan coat gleaming under the tactical harness that identified him as one of Atlanta PD's elite K-9 units. "Control, Unit 247 on scene at Hartwell Complex," Sarah spoke into her radio, her voice steady despite the eerie silence surrounding them. The call had come in as a routine check, reports of suspicious activity in the long-abandoned facility that once housed Atlanta's largest textile manufacturing operation. Max's ears perked forward as he scanned the area, his powerful frame tense with anticipation. Sarah had learned to read every subtle shift in her partner's behavior over their 6 years together. Today, something felt different. The way Max's nostrils flared slightly, the measured pace of his breathing. He was already detecting traces of something that shouldn't be there. "What is it, boy?" Sarah murmured, her hand instinctively moving to rest on Max's head as they approached the main entrance. The heavy steel doors hung askew on rusted hinges, revealing a cavernous interior filled with the ghostly remnants of industrial machinery. As they entered the building, their footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. Shafts of sunlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the still air. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing graffiti-covered walls and debris scattered across the floor. Max suddenly froze, his body going rigid as his nose lifted toward a specific section of the building. Sarah recognized the signal immediately. He'd caught a scent that demanded investigation. Without hesitation, she followed his lead as he moved deeper into the complex, his paws silent against the concrete, despite his 60-pound frame. "Good boy, Max. Show me what you found," Sarah whispered, her training taking over as adrenaline began to course through her veins. Max led her to what appeared to be an old supervisor's office, its windows long since shattered and its door hanging from a single hinge. Inside, scattered papers and debris covered a metal desk, but Max's attention was focused on something specific, a large yellow document partially hidden beneath a pile of construction materials. Sarah carefully moved the debris aside, revealing what appeared to be an architectural blueprint. The paper was old, but remarkably well preserved, as if it had been protected from the elements until recently. At the top, in faded blue ink, were the words, "Hartwell Complex, Sub-Level Modifications," followed by a date from 15 years ago. As Sarah studied the blueprint more closely, her heart began to race. The document showed extensive underground modifications that definitely hadn't been part of the original building plans. But what caught her attention most was a specific marking in the lower right corner, a small symbol that looked like an eagle, accompanied by the notation .14. Max remained alert beside her, his breathing steady, but his posture indicating he was still detecting something significant. Sarah photographed the blueprint with her phone, ensuring she captured every detail of the mysterious document. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered to herself, tracing the underground passages with her finger. "Why would someone need these modifications, and why leave this here?" As if responding to her question, Max suddenly moved toward a section of the wall that looked no different from any other part of the office. But when Sarah approached, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken, the faint outline of what appeared to be a concealed door, barely visible beneath years of accumulated grime and paint. The discovery sent a chill down Sarah's spine. This wasn't just an abandoned building anymore. Someone had been using this place, and the blueprint in her hand suggested something far more complex than simple trespassing or vandalism. Sarah keyed her radio again, her voice maintaining its professional tone despite the growing sense of unease. "Control, Unit 247 requesting backup at Hartwell Complex. I need a CSI team and additional units for a thorough search of the premises." As they waited for backup, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she and Max had stumbled onto something significant. The blueprint felt heavy in her hands, and Max's continued alertness told her they were far from finished with their investigation. The morning that had started as routine patrol duty was about to become something entirely different. Sarah looked down at Max, whose intelligent brown eyes met hers with unwavering trust and readiness. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us, partner," she said softly, folding the blueprint carefully and securing it in her evidence bag. Whatever Eagle and Point 14 meant, she and Max were going to find out. The abandoned complex suddenly felt less empty and more like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next revelation to unfold. Back at Atlanta PD headquarters, Sarah sat at her desk, studying the blueprint under the harsh fluorescent lights. Max lay beside her chair, his head resting on his paws but his eyes alert, watching every person who passed through the K9 unit's bullpen. The enlarged photograph on her computer screen revealed details that hadn't been visible in the dusty office. "Collins, what's got you so focused?" Detective Mike Torres approached her desk, coffee in hand. They'd worked together on several cases, and Sarah had always trusted his instincts, but as she looked up at him, something about his expression made her pause. "Just following up on this morning's discovery at Hartwell," Sarah replied carefully, minimizing the blueprint image on her screen. "Probably nothing, but you know how it is." Torres nodded, but Sarah noticed his eyes lingering on her desk longer than usual. "Yeah, that old place. Been abandoned for 10 years now? Amazing what people leave behind." His tone seemed casual, but Max's ears had perked up, and Sarah had learned to trust her partner's instincts implicitly. After Torres walked away, Sarah pulled up the property records for the Hartwell complex. The modifications shown in the blueprint had never been officially filed with the city planning department. Someone had made extensive underground changes without permits, without inspections, and without any official record. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Karen Hayes. "Need to see you in my office. Bring the K9. Sarah's stomach tightened. Hayes was her direct supervisor and had been supportive of the K9 unit, but the timing felt suspicious. She clipped Max's leash and headed toward the lieutenant's office, noting how several officers seemed to track their movement across the department. "Close the door," Hayes said as soon as they entered. Her usually warm demeanor was replaced by something Sarah couldn't quite read. "I heard about your discovery this morning. The blueprint." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to Max's head as he settled beside her chair. "Yes, ma'am. I was about to file a full report. That won't be necessary." Hayes pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. "The property owners have been notified. Turns out those modifications were part of a legitimate renovation project that was never completed. Nothing to pursue." Max shifted slightly, his body language suggesting he was picking up on the tension in the room. Sarah felt the same unease. "With respect, Lieutenant, the blueprint was marked with some unusual notations. I think it warrants further investigation." Hayes' expression hardened. "Officer Collins, I'm telling you to drop this. The case is closed. You and Max have plenty of other work to focus on." As Sarah left the office, her mind raced. In 6 years of working with Hayes, she'd never seen her supervisor shut down an investigation so quickly. Something was wrong, and Max seemed to sense it too. His pace was more alert, his attention focused on the officers they passed in the hallway. That evening, Sarah decided to conduct her own research. At home, with Max curled up beside her on the couch, she pulled up everything she could find about the Hartwell complex. The property had been sold 3 years ago to a company called Eagle Holdings LLC. The name made her pulse quicken, the same eagle symbol from the blueprint. Digging deeper, she discovered that Eagle Holdings was a shell company with connections to several other businesses around Atlanta. But what made her blood run cold was finding Mike Torres's name listed as a consultant on one of Eagle Holdings' subsidiary companies. Max lifted his head, sensing her agitation. "What do you think, boy? Are we in over our heads?" Her phone rang, startling them both. The caller ID showed Torres's name. "Collins, hey. I've been thinking about what you found today. Maybe we should grab a drink and talk about it." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm not sure there's much to discuss, Mike. Lieutenant Hayes said the case is closed. Yeah, but you know how these things go. Sometimes there are angles that don't make it into the official reports. His voice carried an undertone that made Sarah's skin crawl. I appreciate the offer, but I'm tired. Long day, you know? After she hung up, Sarah double-checked all her locks and made sure her service weapon was easily accessible. Max had moved to the window, his body tense as he watched the street outside. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the station early. She wanted to make copies of the blueprint before anyone else arrived, but when she accessed her computer, the files had been deleted. Not just moved, completely erased from the system. Max whined softly beside her, picking up on her frustration and growing concern. Sarah realized she was no longer investigating a simple property case. She was dealing with something that had tentacles reaching into her own department. Looks like we're on our own, partner, she whispered to Max, scratching behind his ears. Good thing I always trust you more than anyone else. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed more signs that something was wrong. Officers who normally greeted her warmly now seemed distant. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms, and Mike Torres kept finding excuses to walk past her desk, his eyes always searching for something. That afternoon, while Max was getting his routine veterinary check, Sarah made a decision. She drove back to the Hartwell complex alone, parking several blocks away and approaching on foot. The building looked different in daylight, less abandoned and more like it was being watched. Near the rear entrance, she found fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had been here recently, and not just casual trespassers. The tracks suggested regular vehicle traffic, the kind that indicated ongoing activity. Sarah's radio crackled to life. All units, be advised. Officer Collins is to return to headquarters immediately for debriefing. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Someone was tracking her movements, and that someone was inside the Atlanta Police Department. As she hurried back to her car, Sarah realized that the blueprint discovery had opened a door she might not be able to close. The shadows were filled with more than just darkness. They were hiding secrets that people were willing to kill to protect. Max was waiting for her at the station, his tail wagging enthusiastically, but as their eyes met, Sarah saw something in his expression that mirrored her own growing fear. They were about to enter dangerous territory, and the only person she could trust was the four-legged partner who had never let her down. The mandatory debriefing turned out to be a setup. Sarah realized this the moment she entered the conference room and saw not just Lieutenant Hayes, but also Detective Torres, Sergeant Jim Bradley, and 3 other officers she'd worked with for years. Max sensed the tension immediately, his posture shifting to protective mode as he positioned himself between Sarah and the others. Officer Collins, Hayes began, her voice taking on an official tone Sarah had never heard before. There have been concerns about your conduct regarding the Hartwell complex investigation. Sarah's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. What concerns, Lieutenant? Torres leaned forward, his friendly demeanor completely gone. We know you went back to the site this afternoon, alone, without authorization. That's not protocol, Collins. I was conducting follow-up investigation on a potential case, Sarah replied, her hand moving instinctively to Max's head. His fur was slightly raised, and she could feel the tension in his muscles. There is no case, Sergeant Bradley interjected, his bulk filling the chair as he leaned back. The property owners have confirmed that the blueprint you found was related to legitimate renovations. Your continued pursuit of this matter is becoming a problem. Sarah looked around the room, studying faces she'd trusted for years. These were people she'd had dinner with, people who'd celebrated her commendations, people who'd watched her back in dangerous situations. Now they were looking at her like she was the enemy. Since when do we take property owners' word without conducting our own investigation? Sarah asked, her voice gaining strength. Since when do we shut down potential leads without proper examination? The silence that followed was deafening. Max's breathing had become more pronounced, and Sarah noticed his eyes tracking each person in the room as if he was cataloguing threats. Lieutenant Hayes pulled out a thick folder. Officer Collins, we're recommending you take administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. The stress of K-9 duties can be overwhelming, and your recent behavior suggests you might need professional help. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. You're suspending me for doing my job? It's for your own good, Torres said, but his eyes were cold. And we'll need to reassign Max to another handler during your leave. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. They wanted to separate her from Max, the one partner she could trust completely. Max seemed to understand the threat, moving closer to her legs and letting out a low, almost inaudible growl. "That's not necessary," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice professional. "Max and I are a team. If I'm on leave, he should be too. The department can't afford to have a valuable K-9 asset sitting idle," Bradley stated firmly. "Torres has volunteered to handle Max during your absence." Sarah's blood ran cold. Torres wanted Max, probably to ensure the dog couldn't lead any future investigations back to whatever was really happening at the Hartwell complex. Max's abilities were legendary in the department. If anyone could sniff out corruption, it would be him. "I need to file a formal complaint," Sarah said, standing slowly. Max immediately rose with her, his body pressed against her leg. "You're welcome to do that," Hayes replied, "but your suspension begins now. Badge and weapon, please." As Sarah reluctantly placed her badge and service weapon on the table, she caught Max's eyes. The intelligent animal seemed to understand that something fundamentally wrong was happening. His tail wasn't wagging, his ears were pinned back, and his entire body language screamed distrust of everyone in the room except Sarah. "Max stays with me until you find a suitable replacement handler," Sarah said firmly. "Department regulations require a transition period." Hayes and Torres exchanged glances. "Fine," Hayes agreed reluctantly, "but only for 48 hours. Then he gets reassigned." As Sarah left the conference room with Max, she felt the weight of multiple gazes on her back. In the hallway, she overheard Torres speaking quietly into his phone. "She's out of the picture. We just need to deal with the dog." That evening, Sarah sat in her kitchen staring at the official suspension notice, while Max lay at her feet, his head on her boots. She'd made copies of the blueprint on her personal phone before the files were deleted, but she knew that wouldn't be enough to expose whatever was happening. Her landline rang, a number she rarely gave out. "Officer Collins? This is Detective Maria Santos from Internal Affairs. We need to meet tonight and bring your K-9. Sarah's pulse quickened. "How did you get this number?" "I've been watching the situation develop. You're not the only one who's noticed irregularities in the department, but we need to be careful. Can you meet me at Piedmont Park in an hour? Near the dog park. It'll look natural." After hanging up, Sarah looked down at Max. "What do you think, boy? Can we trust her?" Max's tail gave a small wag, not enthusiastic, but not the warning signals he'd been giving all day. Sarah decided to take the chance. An hour later, Detective Santos approached them near the dog park. She was a small, intense woman with sharp eyes that reminded Sarah of Max when he was tracking a scent. "Officer Collins, I've been investigating corruption in the department for 6 months. The blueprint you found is just the tip of the iceberg." Santos handed her a folder. "Eagle Holdings isn't just a shell company. It's a front for money laundering, drug trafficking, and worse, and at least 9 officers in our department are involved." Sarah opened the folder, seeing photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports. 9 officers. Who? Torres, Bradley, Hayes, and 6 others. They've been using the Hartwell complex as a distribution center for 3 years. Your discovery threatened to expose everything. Max suddenly tensed, his head turning toward the parking lot. Sarah followed his gaze and saw a familiar sedan, Torres' personal vehicle. "He followed us," Sarah breathed. Santos was already moving. "We need to go, now. They can't know we've made contact." As they hurried toward their respective cars, Sarah realized that her suspension was just the beginning. 9 corrupt officers would do anything to protect their operation, and she and Max were the only ones who could stop them. The betrayal cut deep, but Sarah felt a surge of determination. She looked down at Max, whose eyes were bright with intelligence and loyalty. "Looks like it's really just you and me now, partner," she whispered, "but we're going to take them down." Max's tail wagged once, firmly. He was ready for whatever came next. Detective Santos had arranged to meet Sarah at an abandoned warehouse across town at midnight. The plan was simple but dangerous. Use Max's exceptional tracking abilities to find the entrance to the underground facility shown in the blueprint. Sarah's suspension meant she was operating outside official channels, but it also meant she was free to pursue the truth without department interference. Sarah arrived first, Max alert beside her as they surveyed the empty parking lot. The warehouse district was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of highway traffic breaking the silence. When Santos's unmarked car pulled up, Max's posture remained neutral, a good sign that he didn't perceive an immediate threat. "I've been monitoring radio chatter," Santos said as she approached. "Torres and Bradley are planning something for tomorrow night. They know you're getting close, and they're accelerating their timeline." Sarah studied the enhanced blueprint images on Santos's tablet. "According to this, Point 14 should be accessible through the main complex, but there's also a secondary entrance through the old steam tunnels that connect to the city's underground infrastructure." Max's ears perked up at the mention of tunnels. His nose twitched, as if he was already imagining the scents he might encounter underground. "The secondary entrance is our best bet," Santos continued. "Less likely to be monitored, and if your theory is correct, Max should be able to track recent activity through the tunnel system." 20 minutes later, they were beneath the city streets, following a maintenance tunnel that connected to the old industrial district. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness while Max moved ahead, his nose working constantly as he processed the complex mixture of scents in the confined space. Suddenly Max stopped and looked back at Sarah, his body language indicating he'd found something significant. They were at a junction where the tunnel branched in 3 directions, but Max was focused on what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to subtle marks in the concrete that suggested a hidden panel. "Just like in the office." Santos examined the wall more closely. "It's a false section. Look at the way the concrete is slightly different here." She pressed against a specific spot, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a well-lit corridor beyond. The air that flowed from the opening carried scents that made Max's tail go rigid. Sarah recognized his reaction. He was detecting drugs, weapons, and human activity. Lots of human activity. "This is it," Sarah breathed. "This is what Eagle Holdings has been hiding." They moved carefully into the corridor, Max leading the way with his nose close to the ground. The passage was much more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. Concrete walls, proper lighting, and ventilation systems that indicated serious construction work. As they progressed deeper, they began to hear voices. Sarah motioned for Santos to stop, and they listened carefully. The voices were familiar, too familiar. "Torres," Sarah whispered, recognizing his distinctive laugh. "And that's Bradley's voice." They crept closer to a large opening where the corridor widened into what appeared to be a significant underground chamber. Sarah's heart stopped as she peered around the corner. The space was enormous, clearly the main hub shown in the blueprint. But it wasn't just a storage facility, it was a full-scale operations center. Tables lined the walls, covered with bags of what appeared to be drugs. Computer equipment hummed quietly in one corner, and several men in expensive suits were examining documents, while 9 police officers, including Torres, Bradley, and Lieutenant Hayes, stood guard or participated in the discussion. Max pressed close to Sarah's leg, his training keeping him perfectly silent, despite the overwhelming sense of illegal activity. Sarah pulled out her phone, grateful she'd thought to bring a device capable of recording video in low light. "This is bigger than we thought," Santos whispered. "They're not just moving drugs, they're running a complete distribution network." As they watched, Sarah saw Lieutenant Hayes hand a thick envelope to one of the suited men. The transaction was clearly routine, suggesting this operation had been running smoothly for a long time. 9 officers, Sarah counted silently. Torres, Bradley, Hayes, Matthews, Rodriguez, Chen, Parker, Wilson, and Johnson. The betrayal felt personal. These were people she'd trusted with her life. Max suddenly tensed, his head turning toward a side passage they hadn't noticed. His body language screamed warning, and Sarah understood immediately. Someone was coming. "We need to move," she hissed to Santos. But it was too late. Well, Officer Collins and her famous dog. Torres stepped out of the shadows, his service weapon drawn. "I was wondering when you'd show up here." Behind him, Bradley emerged with two other officers Sarah recognized from the bullpen. They were trapped, with no easy way back to the tunnel entrance. "You should have stayed suspended, Collins," Bradley said, his voice carrying a menace Sarah had never heard before. "Should have taken the psychological evaluation and kept your mouth shut." Santos had her weapon drawn, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Max remained perfectly still, but Sarah could feel the coiled tension in his muscles. He was ready to act on her command. "The whole department is going to know about this," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can't cover this up." Torres laughed. "The whole department? Collins, you really don't understand how deep this goes. We're not just 9 bad cops. We're part of something much bigger. And your little K9 unit was getting too close to things that could hurt some very important people." One of the suited men approached from the main chamber. "I thought you said this was handled." "It will be," Hayes said, appearing from behind Torres. Sarah's former lieutenant looked completely different, harder, more dangerous. "We just need to tie up some loose ends." Sarah's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped underground with no backup coming. But she had one advantage they didn't expect. Max's training went far beyond drug detection. "Max," she said quietly, using the German command they'd practiced hundreds of times. "Angriff." Max exploded into action, his 60 pounds of muscle and training targeting Torres' weapon hand. The shot went wide as Torres stumbled backward, giving Sarah and Santos the split second they needed to take cover behind a concrete pillar. The underground chamber erupted into chaos as gunfire echoed off the walls. Sarah could hear Max's growls and the shouts of the corrupt officers as they tried to regain control of the situation. "We need to get out of here," Santos yelled over the noise. "And we need to get this evidence to someone we can trust." Sarah looked around desperately. The tunnel entrance was blocked, but the blueprint had shown multiple passages. "Max!" she called. "Come!" Her partner appeared instantly, unharmed but alert. Together, they began moving deeper into the complex, looking for another way out, while corrupt officers and criminals pursued them through the underground maze. The revelations were even worse than Sarah had imagined, but now they had proof. The question was whether they would live long enough to use it. Sarah, Santos, and Max raced through the underground corridors as shouts and footsteps echoed behind them. The complex was larger than the blueprint had indicated, with multiple levels and connecting passages that formed a maze beneath Atlanta's industrial district. Max's nose kept them moving in the right direction, away from their pursuers and toward what Sarah hoped was another exit. "There!" Santos pointed to a metal ladder leading upward. "Emergency exit." But as they climbed, Sarah realized they weren't escaping. They were being herded. Torres had anticipated their route and was forcing them toward a specific location. When they emerged from the manhole, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. They were in an empty lot surrounded by the 9 corrupt officers, all with weapons drawn. "End of the line, Collins," Lieutenant Hayes called out. "You and your dog have caused enough trouble." The Max positioned himself between Sarah and the officers, his hackles raised and teeth bared. He'd never shown aggression toward police officers before, but his instincts told him these people meant harm to his partner. "You made one mistake," Sarah said, her hand resting on Max's head as she tried to project calm confidence she didn't feel. "You assumed I came here without backup." Torres laughed. "What backup? You're suspended, remember? Santos here is going to disappear just like you." Sarah smiled grimly. "I wasn't talking about human backup." She pulled out her phone and hit a speed dial number. Seconds later, the lot was filled with the sound of barking as every K9 unit in the Atlanta Police Department came racing around the corner. 6 patrol cars, 6 officers, and 6 highly trained police dogs surrounded the corrupt cops. "What the hell?" Bradley spun around as Sergeant Mike Thompson and his German Shepherd Rex took position behind him. "Funny thing about K9 officers," Sarah called out. "We have our own communication network. Santos contacted Thompson an hour ago. Every dog handler in the department has been watching this situation develop." The 9 corrupt officers found themselves facing not just Sarah and Santos, but 6 additional K9 teams who had been coordinating the takedown through encrypted channels that bypassed the regular department communications. "Officer Collins activated the K9 emergency protocol," Thompson announced loudly. "All units, these officers are considered hostile and potentially armed with illegal weapons." Torres tried to maintain his authority. "This is ridiculous. We're all police officers here. These women are fabricating evidence." "Really?" Sarah held up her phone, which had been live-streaming the entire underground operation to a secure server. "Because I've got video evidence of 9 Atlanta police officers participating in drug trafficking and attempted murder." Max's tail wagged slightly. He could sense the shift in dynamics as the other police dogs responded to his calming demeanor. The corrupt officers were now completely outnumbered and surrounded by some of the most highly trained law enforcement animals in the state. Lieutenant Hayes made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Collins, you don't understand the full situation. There are people involved in this who will what?" Federal Agent Jennifer Walsh stepped out of one of the patrol cars, her FBI credentials clearly visible. "People who will threaten police officers, who will corrupt an entire department. We've been investigating this operation for 8 months, and Officer Collins just provided us with the final evidence we needed." Santos stepped forward. "Agent Walsh, Internal Affairs has been feeding information to the FBI task force. The evidence from tonight's operation should be sufficient for federal charges against all 9 officers and their civilian collaborators." As FBI agents moved in to arrest the corrupt officers, Sarah felt Max relax against her leg. His job was done. The threat had been neutralized, and his partner was safe. "How did you know to coordinate with the K9 units?" Sarah asked Santos. "Thompson approached me 3 weeks ago. He'd noticed irregular behavior from several officers and suspected something was wrong. K9 handlers are naturally observant. You have to be to work with dogs, and the corruption was affecting normal department operations." Agent Walsh approached Sarah and Max. "Officer Collins, your work on this case has been exemplary. The Federal Task Force would like to recommend you for commendation and will be requesting that your suspension be immediately lifted and expunged from your record." As the corrupt officers were led away in handcuffs, Sarah watched Lieutenant Hayes being read her rights. The woman who had been her mentor and supervisor avoided eye contact, but Sarah felt more relief than anger. The truth was finally coming out. "What happens to the operation?" Sarah asked. "Eagle Holdings is being shut down completely," Agent Walsh replied. "The underground facility will be sealed and all assets will be seized. Your discovery of that blueprint prevented millions of dollars in drugs from reaching the streets and exposed a corruption network that reached into city government and beyond." Thompson approached with Rex, his German Shepherd partner. "Collins, the K9 unit has been offered increased funding and expansion. Headquarters wants to double our numbers and improve our training facilities. Your work here proved how valuable our unit is to the department." Sarah looked down at Max, whose tail was now wagging enthusiastically. He seemed to understand that the danger was over and that they had won. "What do you think, partner? Ready to get back to real police work?" Max barked once sharply, which always meant yes in their private communication system. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same lot where the corrupt officers had been arrested. The area had been converted into a new K9 training facility, and Max was helping train new police dog teams. The underground complex had been sealed and filled with concrete, erasing the physical evidence of the corruption, but not the lessons learned. The 9 officers had all been convicted on federal charges. Torres and Hayes received 15-year sentences, while the others received terms ranging from 8 to 12 years. The civilian collaborators, including the leadership of Eagle Holdings, faced even longer sentences for their roles in the operation. Sarah's commendation for heroic service was displayed prominently in the new K9 facility, but she was most proud of the plaque that read, "In honor of Max and all K9 partners who serve with loyalty, courage, and integrity." As the sun set over Atlanta, Sarah and Max walked their familiar patrol route. The city was safer because they had trusted each other completely when it mattered most. Their partnership had not only survived the ultimate test, it had been strengthened by it. Max looked up at Sarah with the same intelligent, loyal expression that had guided her through the darkest moments of the investigation. In that look, Sarah saw everything she needed to know about trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a police officer and her K9 partner. "Come on, boy," Sarah said, scratching behind Max's ears. "Let's go make sure our city stays safe." As they walked into the evening, 9 empty desks at police headquarters served as a reminder that justice had been served, and the badge meant something again.